The point of a song is not the last note, right? It's really the whole song, right? And that's the journey. A relationship is really a series of conversations.
Showing up as yourself is always the best thing that you can do. You know, like people think, oh, I'd be so happy if I didn't have to work. And that actually creates a feeling of incredible anxiety and meaninglessness. Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky, welcome to the XX Lab.
I'm so happy to be here, Sarah.
I am so happy to see you. I wanted to start by seeing if you remember how you and I met one another.
I'm thinking it was at a conference, SPSP conference.
It was. And we were introduced by our mutual friend, Doug Henrik.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember, but the reason that he introduced me to you is because I had just told him the filthiest joke that I know.
It was the night that we told jokes to each other, right?
Yes, and we were in the presidential...
In a hotel room, but it was like a suite. It was a big suite.
Yeah, it was like the presidential suite.
Yeah.
And I told you what is to this day the filthiest joke I've ever known in my life. And I had told it to Doug, and he thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And so he was like, "You need to meet my friend Sonja, because she will appreciate this incredibly."
That is hilarious.
This incredibly filthy joke. And so anyway, so to me, you are I will forever remember you in the context of being somebody who would appreciate the filthiest joke that I've ever told in my life.
I love that. I do remember the jokes evening. It's such a highlight of all of my conference going experiences. And I always want to recreate that, and somehow we've never quite recreated that evening.
No, I think we'll have to try next year at SPSP.
Yeah.
So I want to start out because you have spent your research career studying a lot of really cool stuff. But I think that the things that you're probably most well known for is your work in well-being and happiness. And I want to start by just talking about what does it mean to be happy?
Mm-hmm. You mean the definition of happiness, or just
what is it? Like I think that everybody thinks they want it. Mm-hmm. Right, but like what is it? Like science, like how would you operationally define that in science?
Yeah, I mean, I always give the scientific definition that I use that Ed Diener, who founded the science of well-being, developed, which is happiness really has two components, two parts, and one is happy people experience positive emotions, pretty frequently. For some people, it could be joy, enthusiasm, affection. For others, it could be calm, tranquility, pride. All right, so it kind of depends on the person. So, and they don't experience positive emotions all the time, of course. Negative emotions are functional, right, and adaptive, as long as they're not too, intense or chronic. So that's one part. It's just positive emotions. That's really kind of the key to being a happy person. But there's another part, which is that having a sense that your life is good, that you're progressing towards your life goals, that you're satisfied with your life. Sort of life satisfaction is that other part. So that's really what happiness is.
And so, is it possible, right, to be happy most of the time? Like, do you think that most people feel happy most of the time?
Well, actually, there's something called a positivity offset, which is that most people are happier than unhappy most of the time. I mean, I'm not sure I don't know what the number is. Not all the time,
right? But
we certainly have more positive emotions than negative emotions on average. I think really. It's only people who are really fairly depressed who have, the ratio sort of the other way. I mean, I wouldn't recommend being happy all the time, most of the time. And we need that contrast. And as I mentioned, negative emotions are really important too. Like if you see injustice in the world, it's important to feel angry, and that prompts you to do something about it. And if you have an upcoming presentation at work, feeling a little anxious is also really adaptive. So, most of us don't feel happy all the time. And so don't feel bad if you don't feel happy all the time.
Yeah, I think that sometimes there's a tendency to assume that a good life is one where you have the absence of negative emotion. And I always, I tell my students, if we had an absence of negative emotion, we would probably all die within 6 months, because it's telling us really useful information, right? I mean,
Exactly. I actually just gave a lecture yesterday to like my science of happiness class about this very thing, where the function of negative emotions is basically to get us out of life and death situations. Right? So we see a tiger or whatever, and we've run away. If we didn't have that instinct, we would die. We need to experience them, and sometimes like they're just very useful and they're growth promoting. It's really only, as I mentioned, when negative emotions are chronic or when they're really intense that they are not functional. They're just suffering, right? So when it's just suffering, there's nothing good about suffering. Is what I say.
Yeah. So how do you tell the difference between those things?
When it's chronic and it's intense, right? It's like if you're experiencing that sadness or the anger or the anxiety, which are really the three main ones, I would say. There's also disgust. If you're experiencing them like a lot of the time and it's interfering with your functioning, with your everyday life, then it's not functional.
Yeah, I always think like evolutionarily about the emotions, and the way that, I always talk about them with my students, for example, is that, it's essentially like the sticks and carrots that are like moving us toward things that historically would have helped promote survival or reproduction. So things like sex and mating and falling in love and forming friendships, and, all of these things feel really good. And we're moving toward things that historically would have led to gene transmission, right? And that the things that feel lousy, being socially isolated, being disconnected, not having a romantic partner, or being broken up with, these things feel really terrible, because essentially it's our brain telling us like, this isn't a positive, don't do this. Exactly. Like, this is bad. And that, essentially that if we can understand our emotions this way and our responses to things this way, it can help presumably guide us toward things, in a sort of more focused way that will make us feel good, and avoiding those things.
Exactly. And, I wasn't, unlike you, I wasn't trained as an evolutionary psychologist, but actually I think about evolutionary psychology all the time. I feel it's really my favorite theory of all time. And I feel like it applies to almost everything, and certainly to emotional life.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always like one of the happiness traps I fall into, and I've fallen into my entire life, and it's one that you write about in your first book, The How of Happiness. And it's this idea that I will be happy when, right? It's that story that our brain tells ourselves about, like, when we arrive to this, whatever the destination is, that we're going to finally feel happy. And so I don't know if you went through this, but it was like, when I was in college, it was like, when I get into a good graduate program, I'll be happy. And then when I was in a graduate program, it was like, when I get my PhD, I'll be happy. When I get a job, I'll be happy. When I get tenure, I'll be happy. When I get my first NSF grant, I'll be happy. When and then you get there, and then you realize there's no there, right? And that you're ultimately, it doesn't really make you happy.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, it sounds like such a cliche, but it's really the journey, right, that matters. But someone just said to me, actually, I was just at a conference, and someone said something like, the point of a song is not the last note, right? It's really the whole song, right? And that's that's the journey. And that kind of stayed with me. So again, human beings are very good at getting used to things. So hedonic adaptation is this phenomena that we sort of adapt to almost everything that happens to us, both positive and negative, but we adapt to the positives faster, right? So, you get the new job, you start a relationship, you move to a bigger house, you get a new car, and first we're really happy, and then we want more. And, and I would say it's evolutionarily adaptive for us to always want more, because otherwise humans would not make any progress, right? We'd reach that hill with that little source of food and some cute guys, and we'd be like, okay, we're done, right? And we don't want to be done. We always want more.
Right. And I think recognizing that, I think, can be really helpful. I mean, I know in my own life, actually my dissertation was on this very issue. The name of the title of my dissertation, and it's so funny because I kind of moved out of this research area almost as soon as I began it, but it was called Dissatisfied by Design. Right. And it's just this idea that our brain is wired to hedonically adapt and have everything, as soon as we reach the one mountain peak, that we want to get to the next one. And ultimately, as you noted, it's it would help promote survival and reproduction, getting us so that way we don't just reach the berry bush with the one cute guy, and then we're like, okay, I'm done here. And then, everybody else is outperforming us by magnitudes, and they're the ones who passed down the genes, right? Because they were presumably continuing to pursue better alternative options. And so then is there hope for us to feel happy, like given the fact that we hedonically adapt, especially to, like hedonic adaptation, positive things, right? When things are good, like we immediately adapt to them. And then there's also the strong genetic component to happiness, which is something that you also discuss in your book. Is there hope for a listener who is kind of a little miserable? Is there hope to feeling better, given that we're wired to be a little bit chronically dissatisfied, and that there is a genetic component to happiness?
And it's exactly the question that I posed in my first book, The How of Happiness. Well, my second book, The Myths of Happiness, is about hedonic adaptation. Basically, the whole book is about hedonic adaptation. So I'm excited to hear that your dissertation was about this. But this is exactly the question that I pose. And of course, there is hope. And I've been studying happiness for 36 years. So I wouldn't be still in this field if I didn't think there was hope. But it's not easy. It's hard. But you know what? Everything in life is hard. If you want to lose weight and become fit or raise happy, healthy children, it's not easy. Like, it takes effort. You have to create good habits. And so much of my career, I think in 1998, my students and I pioneered what we call, this is when Bill Clinton was president, right? So it's a long time ago. In 1998, we pioneered what we call happiness interventions, right? Which are basically randomized controlled trials, clinical trials to test happiness practices. So instead of testing like a vaccine, we're testing happiness practices. And so this is what we've been doing, all these years, testing whether like expressing gratitude, does that make people happier? It does, but you have to keep it up, and you might have to vary it and sort of do it in different ways, and doing it in a way that fits you, because otherwise you'll adapt. We don't adapt to activities as fast as we adapt to like things or or like constant stimuli. And so so we've done these interventions all these years, and then it finally hit me after all these years. Actually, I have a TED talk on this where I say, I realized I wasn't listening to what the data were trying to tell me, which is that almost all of these interventions that work to make us happier. So the interventions are like gratitude interventions, acts of kindness interventions, or interventions where we ask people to act more extroverted. These all work to make us happier. Why do they all work? Do they have something in common? So I realized what they all have in common is they make us feel more connected and more loved. Right? So when I write a gratitude letter to my mom or my best friend, right, I feel more loved by her. When I do an act of kindness for a colleague, I feel closer to them. And so I wouldn't say every single happiness practice makes you feel connected. Maybe you can go take on a run on the beach, and that's not really about connection, but almost everything is about feeling connected and loved, which is how we got to my book, How to Feel Loved. It's sort of happiness to love. So basically, to become a better happiness scientist, I realized I had to become a love scientist, or at least to work with one. So I joined with a co-author, Harry, to write the book.
Yeah, and I'm going to return to the issue of feeling loved, because I think that's I think it's a fascinating topic, and I really loved the book. I thought it was really fantastic, and I really like the mind shifts, like the mindsets that you suggest for feeling more loved. Before we do that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the different types of practice for cultivating happiness. And I want to talk a little bit about like what the science says about these things. So, for example, and you mentioned a lot of these, right? Acts of kindness, of a role like that gratitude plays, right? So having a gratitude practice. So what does this look like? So for example, with gratitude, like if somebody is listening, wants to cultivate more happiness in their life and they want to start a gratitude practice. I know that they sell gratitude journals on Amazon. You can find them in the bookstore. Like, does somebody need to buy a special journal? Like what does it look like to have an effective, based on the research, like what's an effective gratitude practice?
So there's a long answer, I think, to that, because it depends on so many factors. But no, you don't need to buy a journal. We've done so many gratitude studies. We have found, for example, that actually writing gratitude letters to specific individuals in your life, like thanking them for, what they've, the ways they've supported you, et cetera, is more powerful than like writing a list of something, of what you're grateful for. Actually, anytime you sort of write a narrative, one of my students is actually doing a study where we're testing people using AI to help them write a gratitude letter or not, just doing it themselves. And then and then either revealing or not to the person that you're actually sending the letter that you used AI. So that's just because this is happening. And so if you maybe you're someone who just like, I don't know, like has a hard time sitting down and writing a gratitude letter, it can, the AI can help. They'll ask you questions like, well, tell me about your mom, and what is, what do you appreciate about her? But anyway, so letters seem to work better. Yeah.
Okay, I need to know the punchline. So is there a difference? Like, do people experience?
Yeah. It's literally, we just started the study. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think that, I think that one hypothesis would be that the more that it's you genuinely putting your heart on the page, that you'd get the better effect. But I also think that it could be, like, I don't know what role friction, like the friction of having to write and come up with the right word. I don't know to what extent that corresponds then to an increase in happiness, and people we do think there's like competing hypotheses. But I mean, most people think that like if you receive a letter and the person says like, oh, I used Claude to help me write the letter, like it'll somehow have a smaller, I don't know, like a smaller boost. Right. But I don't know, like if one of my kids sent me a letter and the letter has real stuff in it, like they're talking about actual things that we did together that they appreciate, I would really be very happy, even if they used Claude to help them write it. But anyway, it's an empirical question, and I'm excited to find out. Yeah, no, I'm excited too. I've always wondered about with gratitude, does it ever backfire on people? Because do you ever think like where people are like, I don't really feel happy, I don't feel grateful about anything, totally. And then and
I'm actually very interested. Yeah, I'm very interested in backfiring effects. I actually have a whole chapter on when the pursuit of happiness can backfire, if you're interested. But so with gratitude, it kind of depends what you mean by backfiring. So for example, sometimes expressing gratitude can lead to negative emotions, or like not necessarily negative, but kind of unpleasant feelings. So for example, a feeling of indebtedness, or a feeling of humility, right? And which those are not necessarily bad things to experience, and actually like you can think it's adaptive, right? Like maybe gratitude, that's why we have gratitude, is it makes us feel indebted, and then it helps us reciprocate and pay back, even if it doesn't feel so bad. In fact, I've been told that in some languages, the word grateful is the same as the word indebted, which is interesting, right? It's kind of really the same thing. But sometimes same thing with acts of kindness. Like sometimes it backfires. Like you do an act of kindness for someone, and they don't appreciate it, or like it makes them feel worse because they feel like incompetent because you had to help them, or it's just not, it doesn't work. Or with gratitude, sometimes it's just really awkward and uncomfortable to share gratitude. One of my students actually started a line of research. She's actually now a professor in Singapore, Lisa Walsh. But her husband is from Singapore, so she got the perfect job, and so she was studying gratitude letters. So she decided one day to like write him a letter of gratitude and read it out loud to him, and she did. And she said it really backfired. Like it was really uncomfortable and awkward. And so she thought maybe there's some cultural differences in how we respond to gratitude expressions. So yeah, anyway, lots of questions in that area.
So I think that sometimes when people think about people who are happy, and they think about people who have a lot of advantages, right? Because I think that we have this implicit theory that happiness is something that is reserved for people like when they're really good looking, or they have a really, really good jobs, and, or they've got a really great education. Is there a relationship between these things? Like is happiness, like, do we see more happiness in people who've kind of got it all going on, or are we all kind of equally miserable?
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox. Actually, I was just talking to someone about sort of what we call extrinsic goals, right? Sort of like those are like money, power, fame, beauty. We think those are the things that are going to make us happy. But the truth is, people who have, money, power, fame, beauty actually are happier than people who don't. It's really the pursuit of those things that seems to be not associated with happiness, or even associated with unhappiness. So materialists are unhappy because they're pursuing material things and money, but it's a big correlation between happiness and money. So happy people do have more advantages. It's just that it's just not as a strong, I would say, a finding as you think it would be, because as we know, it's a lot more. Like we certainly know lots of people who are unhappy who have those advantages. Like money, to use money as an example, lots of research shows that money does make you happy as long as you spend it right? As long as you spend it on like connection and growth. And then my favorite finding from a few years ago, this is so great, is that money is correlated with happiness, but only for people who are happy to begin with, right? So if you're already a happy person, more money makes you happier. If you're not a happy person, more money doesn't make you happier, probably because you just find more things to compare yourself to or whatever. Yeah.
Well, right. I was thinking that it was probably about social comparison, right? Because I think that some of the most unhappy people are people, if you can't keep your social comparisons in check, you're just bound to be miserable, especially, and I think in our current environment where you have social media and everything else, where you can constantly compare yourself to better people who are better off than you. And I think that the more money you have, the more, that you're like, if you're somebody who's prone to comparison, the people you start comparing yourself to are just like outrageously wealthy. What I mean? Just like
always someone who's wealthier or healthier or more beautiful than you are. And coincidentally, my dissertation was about happiness and social comparison. So
yeah, that's so funny.
Long time ago. Yeah.
And so, and you also talked about in your book, and you talked about what I thought was really cool was, you kind of broke down like what the different pieces are to happiness and like the genetic component and, sort of the fact that we hedonically adapt. And you suggested that there's maybe about 40% that we have control over, which is a lot. I mean, this idea that we have, control over about 40% of how happy we feel. And you talked about the things like, gratitude and kindness. We also talked a lot about cultivating and investing in relationships and the health of your physical body, right? So essentially it's like you're being a well-rounded person where you are somebody who has a gratitude practice, or you're noticing the things that you have that are happening that are going well, and you've got good relationships and you've got healthy bodies. And like what, for somebody who's like looking for a place to start, because that's a lot, right? This idea that you need to have a healthy body and whatever, where would you think somebody should start when it comes to just like trying to improve the way that they feel and improving the frequency of positive emotions relative to negative emotions in their lives?
Well, first I want to just say something, just correct something, which is that 40% from like more than 20 years ago, I have, no longer believe in that number. I think that number was just, it was just a heuristic. It was just kind of like an estimate that people have sort of taken too seriously. And I have a paper where Ken Sheldon, my collaborator, and I kind of discuss that, and we sort of refute what we said before, but it doesn't really matter. So the point is that there's a lot of control that we have about our happiness. I just can't put a number. I just don't want to put a number on it.
So can we just? I want to circle back to that really quick though. Tell me a little bit about revisiting that 40%. I'm just really curious.
It's a really long story that's very technical. Like at the time we wrote that paper, which was like 2003, like more than 20 years ago, we looked at all the literature and we kind of, based on the literature that was out there, we made this sort of computation, this estimate.
Right.
Now there's like hundreds more studies, and it was really just, it was just meant as like a really, it was just meant as an estimate, and then it just sort of took off, and now it's everywhere. Like if you Google, it's called the happiness.
Oh, really?
Chart. It's all over, and so I can't seem to get away from that.
So do you think it's more or less, or it depends? I mean, because I'm guessing the answer is. I
have no idea. The point is that we just should not give numbers. So I guess I learned a lesson.
Okay, so where do we begin then? So we have some. How about this? We have some element of our happiness that we do have control over. Okay. And so where do we start? Do we start with the health of our body? Do we start with the health of our relationships? What do you think?
Well, again, there's a different question between, there's a question about where to begin versus what's most important, and maybe they're the same answer. Because you can begin, it depends on sort of your resources and your values and your habits and your traits,
Right.
But really the most important is connection, relationships. This is kind of what I said before.
Right.
Really the key to happiness is feeling connected. And I say, when people ask me kind of what's your number one happiness tip, and I used to hate that question because I'm like, I don't know, it depends. But now my number one happiness tip is to go out and have a conversation with someone and sort of really feel connected, but don't have a small talk conversation, go deeper. So, and sort of, because you will feel more connected and loved and make the other person feel more connected and loved, when you can have kind of a relatively deep conversation with someone where you're really sharing, you're listening, you're showing curiosity. So yeah, that's what it's not hard, right? We can all do it, even if you're an introvert. We can all do it. We can do it. We can do it with a stranger. We can do it with a family member. It's a variety of people in our lives. Really, conversations are kind of like the currency. A relationship is really a series of conversations. And so,
and do you think is it the same for, you said it's the same for introverts and extroverts? So for somebody who really doesn't who doesn't get energy, who feels like they're having their energy sucked out of them when they are interacting with other people, do you think that too?
well, here's the thing. I think my honest opinion, Susan Cain wrote this book called Quiet, which, by the way, I love the book.
I love that book too. You had actually recommended that book to me for one of my children.
Is that right? Yeah, right. Because me too. I actually read it also in part for my children. I was on I interviewed with her not too long ago. I love her. But she sort of popularized this idea that introverts gain energy, that extroverts are energized by social connections and introverts are depleted. We don't really have research evidence to support this. There's some evidence that, actually extroverts get really tired. I mean, because they socialize so much, they actually get very depleted by socializing, partly because they socialize more. So actually, partly we really need more empirical evidence to support this. We did a study where we asked people to either act extroverted or introverted for 1 week. But we had people define, this is an experiment, but we had the participants define what we meant by acting. Well, we didn't use the word extroverted, but we said sociable, energetic, assertive, etc. But they didn't have to go be the life of the party, right? So by being more extroverted, maybe you could just just talk a little bit more at lunch with your friends or call someone up. And so we were shocked to find that both introverts and extroverts had, the exact same. There were no differences. They both were highly rewarded during the extroversion week. They got happier and lots of outcomes sort of increased. And actually on some outcomes, people got less happy during the introversion week. And it was just a week, so it's possible if it was longer, we would have different effects. And there's a bunch of studies that show the same thing. There's one study out of Australia that does show that introverts don't benefit as much. So there's that finding. I concede. So maybe we need to do more research to kind of get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I really do think that that having conversations, even having chit-chatting with the cashier, or things that we do just to connect with other people and actually look at them and see them, actually see them as a human. I can see that can have huge benefits even to really strict introverts, where it's just having that quick moment of connection, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone. And it's not hard.
It's just a little, and as you may know, Nick Epley at University of Chicago, Booth, does tons of research on this. He has a new book coming out. Actually, you should have him on your podcast next month called A Little More Social. But, his research is all about how we underestimate how happy we'll be by talking to someone on the train next to us or on the airplane or to the barista. It's just a little bit of, it's funny because I don't like to chit chat. I don't really chat people up. So even I know the research that it says it'll make me happier. And when I talk to the Uber driver, I am happier. Of course, it's an average. All psychological findings, right, are just average effects. So, of course, there might be some bad conversations along the way, but on average, you'll be happier if you talk a little bit more to other people, other humans.
Yeah, I think that humans are, I think that our lay theories about what's going to make us happy are just all totally wrong. You know what I mean? I think that we think that we're going to be make us happy is not having to work, people think, oh, I'd be so happy if I didn't have to work and I could just, do whatever and lounge around and whatever. And that actually creates a feeling of incredible anxiety and meaninglessness.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that we need to do that make us actually feel good and create meaning in our life are oftentimes things that have a little bit of friction for us, right? And including the conversation with the Uber driver, where it's you don't really, it might make you feel a little uncomfortable, and but then ultimately it registers a social connection, and then it improves your well-being. And that's one thing I've definitely learned about myself. Has been that my intuitions about what's actually going to make me happy are usually dead wrong.
The puzzle, mine too, even though I know the research, and the puzzle is well, you're the evolutionary psychologist, why, it seems like that would not serve us well to have such wrong intuitions. Maybe it just sort of doesn't really matter if we're feeling good, right? survival.
I think that it's because throughout most of our evolutionary history, everything was like baked into struggle. And so pleasure was baked into struggle. And now you've got marketers who've extracted the pleasure from the struggle. And so like we think that we're just looking for the pleasure. And so we're kind of going after those things and whatever seems most frictionless, because ultimately, evolutionarily, that would have been rewarding. And it would have been, again, baked into all of these things that we had to do to create meaning. And now that the meaning has been stripped away from so many things, you've got porn without relationships, right? You've got ultra processed food that has no fiber and nutrients. You've got social media that gives you this little hit of like, social whatever, like catching up on gossip, but without the friction of having to interact with other people. And so I think that we chase the reward. And now that it's been stripped from all of the things that create meaning, I think that it leads to all of these different traps that we get stuck into. And so yeah. And so I think that it's sort of an evolutionary mismatch that has led us to be so, so wrong, oftentimes about what we think is going to make us happy, instead of like thinking about what's going to create meaning. And like one thing I've had to like spend a lot of time thinking about in my own life is like understanding that, yeah, you need to do things that are going to create friction and make you tired and kind of a little bit overwhelmed sometimes, but ultimately it's going to lead to better well-being and make you feel like you have a life that's being lived well. And I found that to be true in my own life.
Yeah, totally agree.
Do you think that, some people have, and we're going to pivot soon and talk about being loved because I'm really excited about that topic, but I want one more question about happiness. And that is it possible, some people have a really hard life, like whether they've experienced some sort of a traumatic event or, they just like life is hard for them, they have to work a couple of jobs. Like, is there space still for building happiness, even when you've had you're having a tough time, like life is a little hard for you?
At the same time, yeah, okay, because the two answers. Certainly, I had a really traumatic childhood and adolescence, so that actually made me a happier person today. But that's a different answer because I'm no longer having that experience, right? So it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, makes you happier. So that happened to me. But if you're having a hard life right now, I do absolutely believe it really depends. I mean, if all of your energy is like sort of survival and safety and putting food on the table, taking care of your children, I mean that it would leave very little capacity, right, for happiness. But like I actually had an example in one of my books about a woman whose mom was dying. So her mom is dying, and it's really awful, and she loves her mom, and she's taking care of her. At the same time, she's dealing with insurance companies, and it's this horrible financial thing that she has to deal with, and it's very stressful. But like every day she's able to take, like there's a farmer's market, for example, and she can go for like 45 minutes or an hour and really enjoy, going to it's like her favorite thing to go to the farmer's market. And so you can compartmentalize, but it's hard, right? And like really not think about that. And also like tell yourself, this is good. Like you're going to be a better, caretaker of your mom if you really like refresh and take care of yourself, right? For those 45 minutes. So I do think it's possible, but it is really hard, right? Because you have to turn off your brain from thinking about those things. Because again, it's adaptive for us when there's a problem to sort of stop and think about how to solve that problem, right? And sort of like we keep ruminating about it. Anyway, so it's really.
Yeah, I love that story. It actually just reminded me of last year, my husband was going through cancer treatment, and it was like it didn't go well at first, and we didn't know what was going to happen next, and it was really terrible. And every morning I would take a walk, and on the walk I would just like notice the birds and notice the squirrels and the bunny and the sound of acorns under my shoe. And it was like I took that time not only, to be out in nature, which is also really positive for, mental health and physical health, moving my body around. But it was like I just really took in a daily practice of noticing and focusing my energy outward instead of inward, and ruminating and worrying and, trying to think about how to solve this problem that wasn't mine to solve. Right. And I found that doing that, it was really it was really powerful. I mean, that was like one of the most powerful things I've ever gone through. I mean, it's one of the most intense things I've ever gone through as a human being. But one of the most powerful things was those daily walks where it was just focusing on what I could notice, and and the beauty in there. And I had totally forgotten about this my own life experience until you were telling me that.
Another example. I'm sorry I had to go through that. I think they call it like a meditation. It's like a meditative walk, right? It's like a meditation walk, basically. And it allowed me to maintain, a level of well-being even in the midst of a very challenging time in my life. And anyway, that was a reminder of that. So I guess, it works. That works. I want to talk now and to pivot from talking about explicitly just like how to be happy and cultivate happiness. Which, by the way, any of you who do not have, Sonja's got 2 books on happiness. The one I've got sitting right next to me is The How of Happiness. And I love this book for a bunch of different reasons, but it includes a bunch of quizzes and stuff, which I really appreciate as somebody who likes to collect data and likes rating things on scales. And this is really nice for those of you who want to do me search and better understand kind of where you are at in your own life vis-a-vis happiness, and then what types of activities might help to increase your happiness. And among the things that you describe in your book is this idea of cultivating relationships and feeling loved. And that is now the topic of your new book with Harry Reese, which is How to Feel Loved, which I love the cover. I love it so much. I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, and which is rare. Like, I don't know about you, but I've had some real disagreements with with my publishers about covers.
It's like they send it to us and we're like, it's a paper heart, just folded a little bit. We were like, yes, it's perfect. That rarely happens. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And what I really loved about this book is when I saw it, I immediately felt like the title. I immediately felt seen. And the reason I felt seen was that I have gone through periods in my life where I found it hard to feel loved. And I didn't really realize that was universal. I always thought that it was something that was like wrong with me, either wrong with me in terms of like I don't have the capacity for feeling loved to the extent that I'm supposed to, or that maybe I'm just not lovable, right? And that there's something wrong with me. And so, how common is it to not feel loved, and why? Like, why do we feel this way?
Yeah. First of all, I thank you for that, saying that. I just took notes. So Harry and I did a survey expressly for the book, and we asked people like how often do they not feel loved, or not as frequently as they wish. And 70% said there's at least one relationship in their life where they don't feel as loved as they'd like to. And 40% said they don't feel as loved as they'd like to by their romantic partner. Wow. I actually think those numbers are understatements, but that was just from one study, one sample that we had, fairly representative. I think it's fairly common that we can be surrounded, kind of like loneliness, right? You can be surrounded by people but still feel lonely. You can be surrounded, you can have connections, you can have good relationships. You can have people who love you, so you can be loved, but not feel loved. And so the book is really about then what do you do? What do you do? Can you feel more loved, and can you make other people feel more loved too? Because it can also we didn't really think about it, but it could be when we were writing it. You might be reading the book because there's someone in your life that you feel like they're not feeling loved by you, and you're not sure what to do. You feel like you're doing everything and you're not sure. So, so I think it's the best thing. Both Harry and I think it's really the best thing we've ever done in our careers. Sometimes you just sort of know that, and so we're really excited about this book.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times when people are feeling unloved, they feel like they must have done something wrong, right? Like that they're just not really lovable, or there's something about them that's turning people off. And in this book, one of the ideas that you talk about is that, that's usually not the case, right? It's not that we're unlovable when we're feeling unloved, that a lot of it just has to do with the way that we're experiencing the love that we have. So one of the things that you talk about that was so interesting in the context of how to feel love and experience this was this idea of the relationship seesaw. And I am hoping that you can tell us what the relationship seesaw is, and how we can use that to help ourselves feel loved.
Yeah, great. I remember kind of working it through with I think my daughter was 13 at the time, in a coffee shop. And so we call it a seesaw, but we spell it SEA, having to do with water, the sea. And I'm looking at the ocean right now from my window. So imagine you and I, Sarah, like we're sitting on the opposite ends of a seesaw, but we're submerged in water. And so only kind of the tops of ourselves are showing. And why is that? And that's because, and it's kind of amazing when you see it, that's like how we are in normal life. Like we don't really show most of ourselves to others. Another way to think about it is like we have these walls around us and sort of, and they help us protect ourselves, right? But we don't really let people in. And so anyway, so we're sort of submerged. I'm only showing you usually just the kind of the positive side, the tip, the polished tip. And so again, why is that? Because we try to, like, we want people to have a positive impression of us. So like right now I'm talking to you and I want you to think that I'm smart and interesting and funny and kind, right? And a good person. And so I'm trying to impress you, right? We're trying to impress each other. And that happens all the time. It's very human. It's very normal, whether it's with a neighbor on a first date or any kind of professional meeting. And so, we're really just showing to each other kind of that positive side, those positive tips. And so, but that doesn't make us feel loved, right? So if I'm only showing you my positive side, I might succeed in impressing you, and I might succeed in you like admiring me. Think about all those influencers with followers, right? So they're admired, but do they feel loved? And I would say no, because to feel loved, you really need to know me. It's really being known is the key to feeling. So again, that's what the seesaw is about. So what happens then? We're on the seesaw. So basically the other key that we say is that if I want to feel more loved, I need to go first. Which seems a little unfair. I need to go first and try to make you feel more loved. So how do I do that? I start by showing genuine curiosity in you. All right, so I'm thinking, something about Sarah, what do I want to know? She once mentioned a passion that she has for astronomy. So I'm going to ask her about astronomy or whatever. Or just ask her about, her day and her inner life. And so the idea is that I'm sitting on the seesaw, by showing curiosity, it's like I'm pressing down on my part of the seesaw, and you know what that happen? What that does is it helps you lift up a little bit higher out of the water. And so when you're lifting up, you're basically showing more of yourself to me, and you're sharing. And this is what we call this a sharing mindset. And you're able to sort of share a little bit more of your full self, and not just the positive side, but other sides. It doesn't have to be negative, right? But it could be, what really matters to you. What does it mean to be you? And then you're telling your story, and then I listen. So again, we're on the seesaw, and then so I'm kind of going through everything really fast, but it's kind of a nice summary of the whole book. And then I'm really listening, and most of us are bad listeners, including me. And I'm listening to learn. I'm really taking it in. I'm not just rehearsing my next thought, right? And I'm really listening. And so then you're feeling safe, and you're trusting, and you're inspired to share even more. And so I'm kind of lifting you up in the water, and I'm also showing warmth, and I'm showing acceptance. And then the real kind of tricky part is like, how does the seesaw move? Because then what happens is, I hope, you reciprocate.
Right.
So again, you're an evolutionary psychologist, so the reciprocity norm is so important, right? Where would humans be without the reciprocity norm? Like, you do something for me, I do something for you. It's one of the most powerful rules of social behavior. And so that is most of the time, not all the time, most of the time that's going to happen, where you're going to reciprocate. And then you're going to be inspired to show curiosity in me and lift me out of the water a little bit. And then I'll share, you listen. And so it's kind of this dynamic process of being lifted and lifting the other person.
Yeah, so I think that what I love about this is, it's essentially like it's just allowing you to feel loved yourself. You need to be seen, is right what I'm hearing, and that to make other people feel loved, we need to let them know that we see them. And I love this because it's like one way or the other. I think that it's positive, right? Because if it turns out that I want to feel loved by you. And so I am going to do things that allow you to, sort of show yourself to me, and then show, appreciation and genuine curiosity, and ask you questions and let you know that I'm listening. And then if you don't reciprocate, then that's also really important information for me, right? Because I think that it can be I always tell my daughter, I have a college age daughter. And so I talk to her a lot, and she's at the age in life where she needs a lot of life advice. And one of the things I always tell her is that whatever happens as a result of the truth, in other words, of showing your true self, is positive, even if it doesn't feel good.
Wow.
Because I think that, when we reveal ourselves, that it's like it gets us closer in alignment to living a life that's truly ours. Right. And so because sometimes the things that we think that we want don't fit us. Right. And so it's sort of, I think it's as a rule of thumb, is like showing up as yourself is always the best thing that you can do. Because then even if it turns out that you fail, like if it turns out that I'm, terrible at podcasting, but I show up as myself when I'm doing it, then that probably means it's not well suited for me. And then I can go back to writing books, and like do something else,
That's so beautiful. I'm writing all this down. This is really beautiful. And totally aligned with what we're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really, I love that.
Yeah.
And, oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, because I've been thinking, like, because people keep asking me, what if the other person doesn't reciprocate, right? So you're doing everything, like you're sharing yourself, and not just your positive qualities, but your weaknesses and shortcomings and your sort of messy insides. And then they don't, and you're listening to them and you're showing curiosity, and then they don't reciprocate. And so I've been thinking of it as like, this is a negative, right? And so I'll say, and people say, what happens? What should I do if they don't reciprocate? And I'll say, well, maybe you need to walk away. Maybe you need to pause that relationship. Maybe you just need to, maybe it's a family member you can't walk away, and you sort of need to accept that this is not a person that you're going to feel more loved by. And so I've been thinking of it as, a negative. And so I kind of love, your addition to this, which is like, well, it's both, it's mixed. Yes, it's a negative, it's too bad, but
yeah, but I think it's positive. Yeah, always, but even though it doesn't feel good, right? Because I have family members that I have relationships with where I would say that, in terms of the, not really like showing up as I am, and it's not, I don't feel like it's reciprocated in the way that it should be. And I think everybody's got people in their lives like that where they, but recognizing that that's who they are. Right. And that's the relationship that you have. I think that if you understand that, and you also, because I'm also one of those types of people where I tend to have a lot of grace with people, where I just sort of know, I kind of assume that everybody's doing the best thing that they can, and if you assume that, like, this is just who this person is, they're doing the best that they can, it's not about me, it allows me to continue to have a good relationship with those people. Just sort of like taking them as they are, which is how I want them. Yeah, which is the way I want to be received. I want people to receive me as me, and understanding, that sometimes it's going to be a better relationship than others. But yeah, I think that what I really loved, about this book was this idea of love, and feeling loved is about being seen as you.
Right, and being known, like you're actually showing kind of, as you said, the truth about you, because I guess you could feel seen when it's rare to feel seen when they don't really know you. I was going to say, no, I think you and I are really kindred spirits, because I often talk about this, and I think as the older I've gotten, the more I feel like what you're feeling, which is sort of this idea, and actually I learned it from a coach, which is that, when someone isn't showing up for you, my coach, her name was Emily, and she would always say to me, she's like, Sonja, if they could, they would, but they can't. It's like they lack the capacity. They just can't. And sort of having I don't always want to continue maybe you're more positive, or I don't know, more able to continue the relationship. Sometimes I don't continue the relationship, but I still have compassion and understanding. And again, it's like, if they could apologize, they would, because sometimes you just want someone to apologize, right? And they just won't. If they could, they would, but they can't. And so I always, and I repeat that to a lot of my friends, and now my friends all repeat it to others, because I think it's such a great piece of wisdom. And it's really related to one of the mindsets we talk about in our book, which we call the multiplicity mindset, which is really seeing people in all of their complexity, right? And so, and that is so hard. There's so many tests of this, because we're like a quilt of both positive and negative, traits and behaviors and emotions. And we know this, and yet so many times I'll tell someone this person did something, and they are like, I would never, talk to that person again. And they just cannot hold in their minds that you can do something bad and yet still be a good. And there's some extreme examples. I mean, we can talk about, and they could still be a good husband and father, but they did this bad thing, right? And I have a friend who went to prison. And, he's lost, I would say, 80% of his friends. And some of my friends are like, why? He did his time. He's very repentant. He's really ashamed. He's a really, really good person in many, many other ways. And many people just cannot see him with that multiplicity lens. It's like they let this one behavior define his whole life, his whole personality. And so it's hard. It's hard to sort of see people as complex, messy humans.
I loved, and we'll go through the 5 mindset shifts in just a moment, but I really loved that multiplicity mindset because and we are kindred spirits, because I've always had this, and I don't know if it's because of some things that went on during childhood. I've got a very complex relationship with my dad, my biological father, but I love him and I'm able to have a good relationship with him because I have this multiplicity mindset. And recognize that it's like, I don't believe in, with the exception of psychopaths, of course, I don't believe in like good people, bad people. I believe that people are very complex and that most people are capable of doing good and bad things. And for some people, it's worse things than others. And I think that even people who do bad things sometimes can have good elements of them. And it's just a matter of understanding who they are, right? Again, using your seesaw analogy, it's like seeing them as who they are, right? Accepting that and then understanding the relationship that you need to have with them based on who they are and what their sort of multiplicity is. And I think that to me has been one of the, reasons that I think that I have as much happiness in life as I do is because I think that I really live that. And so anyway, so I really, that particular mindset really resonated with me. And so I want to quickly just go through these. I know that we don't have that much time left, but I want to talk about, tell me about the mindset shifts, and we can kind of go through them one by one. But you start by talking about sharing, which I think we've talked about, which is just this idea of allowing whoever it is that you'd like to be loved by, whether it's your partner or whether it's a child or a parent or a relative or friend, is sharing and sort of revealing yourself and allowing your partner or your friend or whatever to reveal themselves, right? To show us themselves.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So basically all of the, it's going to be easy to list the mindsets because we've talked about all of them already. So sharing, as you said, so really the key to feeling loved is to be known and to know the other person, right? And you can't be known and know the other person without sharing. And sharing doesn't mean dumping all your traumas or secrets right away. There's, you want to share at the right pace. You really need to have emotional intelligence and read the room, read the other person, gauge their curiosity as you're sharing, right? And so that's called the sharing mindset. And then we have a listening to learn, a mindset called listening to learn, right? So when you're sharing, I'm listening to learn instead of listening to respond. So usually when we're listening, we're kind of mentally rehearsing our next response instead of truly listening. I read a survey recently that said that 25% of the time when we're trying to listen, our mind is wandering, which is, a lot. So listening to learn, and then curiosity. So actually, and curiosity is really showing genuine interest in the other person and asking questions. I think I'm actually doing a study right now with a student where we're gonna test sort of question asking, which I think is such an important part of social life. I tell my kids to ask questions, to ask a lot of questions, right? People want to be asked questions about themselves. And then Nick Epley shows that we underestimate the extent to which people really crave to be asked personal questions and deep questions, right? We think it'll be uncomfortable or prying, but most of us crave to be seen, right? And to be answering those questions. And the difference between listening and curiosity is really enthusiasm, right? Because you can be a great listener and get an A+ in your listening, kind of like when you're listening to a lecture. answer and not really be curious, right? We've all gotten E pluses on a test, right? And not been curious. We just do it because we have to. So curiosity has sort of an enthusiasm component. And then we already talked about multiplicity, which is when you're listening to the other person, it's really seeing them as a quilt of both positive and negative traits and qualities, and seeing them in their messy complexity and with acceptance. And also, by the way, turning the multiplicity mindset onto yourself, and then seeing yourself as a complex person. That's a whole other, we talk about that too, whole other thing that's really complicated for people, right? Because sometimes we need to forgive ourselves, right? And accept our shortcomings. And then the mindset we haven't really talked about, but it's kind of the most obvious one for relationships, we call the open heart mindset. And the reason I say it's obvious is that most relationships that are kind of stable, I hope, are characterized by the open heart mindset, because it's basically showing warmth and kindness towards the other person, believing in them, wanting them to be happy, right? I mean, I would think that if you don't have an open heart mindset towards a partner or a good friend or a family member, that, you probably do not have a relationship or much of a relationship, right? So I would actually argue that most of us have the open heart mindset, but we don't have the other four, which is, again, sharing, listening, curiosity, and multiplicity. Harry and I actually developed a quiz. Actually, I'll give you some context. When we first wrote the book, I sent it to a bunch of friends, and two of my friends, who are both guys, said, "I love the book." They gave me comments, and they said, "Your book led me to break up with my girlfriend." Both of them broke up with their girlfriends because they read the book. And we were shocked. We're like, what? Why? Because we thought of it as a sort of prescriptive, like use it to help you feel more loved. But they treated it as a diagnostic. So they looked at the mindsets and they held them as a mirror to their relationship. And one guy said, I realized my girlfriend is not curious about my work or my life. And the other guy said, my girlfriend's not sharing, I'm not sharing either, and she's not listening. And so we actually created a quiz. And by the way, if you go to howtofeelloved.com, you can find everything, including the quiz. So it's just a 5-minute quiz that it'll help you know which mindset you're sort of strongest in and which you're in most need of improvement, which I think people really like to understand that and then get tips for, which one, I don't know, which one do you think it would be for you, Sarah?
For me, which one do I think I'd be strongest in?
Yeah. And then
all right, I'm looking at my list. So I think that I'm probably best at multiplicity mindset, as noted. Yeah. It's just kind of the way I operate.
Which I think most people are weak at. So that's great. Yeah.
I am probably and I'm also kind of curious. Like I'm a kind of an intellectually curious person, which I think, is sort of part of the reason that we're in science is like, I like to ask questions and I'm curious about people. I think the listening to learn, not to react thing is hard for me. And I think that it's because of, it's like I'm a perfectionist. And so like I always want everything to, I want to keep the conversation going and I want to, have the right answer and sound smart. And
it's hard for everyone. And I actually got some great advice about listening to learn. And Harry and I actually went to a listening workshop where we had to learn how to listen. And that was really hard. Because you really have to listen like you're trying to memorize, like you're going to be tested on it,
Right.
The best advice I got about listening is think about listening like watching a film. So when you're watching a film, unless you're a film critic, right, you're writing a review or something, you're not formulating an answer or like a response. You're just taking it in. Like you're just sitting there and you're just taking it in. And so they're like, if someone's talking, just kind of taking it in like it's a movie. I love that.
I love that too. Like I will try to use that moving forward because I think that it's like I think that's probably the one I'm the weakest at. What's yours? Like what is your
I'm good at multiplicity. I'm very good at open heart. Yeah, I think my weakest is listening or curiosity. I mean, I'm a curious person, but social curiosity, right, which is curiosity about people. Sometimes I'm just talking to someone. I'm like, I just can't find. I've tried to ask them questions. Just can't find something interesting in them. And I know every human has something of interest to offer. Maybe you have to just get at that somehow. Lift them up, with the seesaw by asking the right questions with the right tone, the right pace, right? So that's hard.
One of I think that in this day and age with social media and everybody is like showing the best version of themselves, it's like carefully curated, filming 8 different versions of the video before they find the one that they're going to post. And, I think that it's harder than ever to feel seen. I think that that we are just like these like a lot of people feel like they're avatars. And so I love how to feel loved. And I think that it really is, in a lot of ways, the cure to that issue, right? Like for yourself, like understanding that, that you can help other people feel seen. So that way you can first, like you said with the seesaw, you can help your partner or your friend or whoever it is, help them feel loved. But understanding that taking those steps to be vulnerable and to show your authentic self. I mean, because with some of these things, we can do without having to wait for somebody to ask us questions, right? We can just show up as ourselves and be honest and be true.
Exactly. And, we mentioned this, and this is a good, I guess, point to end on, is that, we won't ever really feel seen or loved if people don't really know who we are on the inside, right? Because if we're hiding, if we're only showing, as you said, like making that perfect video, posting about our vacation and all our best days, we'll always wonder, would that person love me, still see me if they knew what I'm really like on the inside, right? And I've mentioned how, I can't imagine that influencers feel loved, right? Because they might feel admired, but you're really not known. You're really not known. So yeah, again, the key is being known, is showing more of your full self to others. And I think, we can all take little steps to do that, starting today.
Well, thank you for showing up as your full self today on the XX Lab and talking about your wonderful books. And before we get off, where can people find you?
Mm-hmm. So the easiest way, is just howtofeelloved.com, just the title of the book, howtofeelloved.com, because that also links to my other, the other works. Yeah, I have one too. And that's where you can find the quiz. And I have a TED Talk that's just a 5-minute talk that's just kind of the summary of everything. So if you have a very short attention span, because you watch TikTok videos all day, you can just watch that 5-minute talk. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you. And that's it for today's episode of the XX Lab. If you want more, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show, a rating or review helps other people find it. See you next episode.